So we're going to be reading book 9, starting book 9, I should say, of the Odyssey. Remember, the Odyssey is a 500-page book, and the textbook that we have has chopped it all up and given us little portions here and there in an attempt to make it sort of bite-sized so you don't get overwhelmed. It's a lot for a ninth grader to handle reading the entire Odyssey. I highly recommend it. If you enjoy what you've read here, go ahead and read the Odyssey. It's a good read, it's a fun read, and it's also something that everybody should read. It makes you sort of cultured and wise to have read the whole thing. But whatever the case, last time in the Odyssey, we'll go back to Odysseus' terrible, horrible, no good, very bad business trip. We actually start out on Calypso's island here. In our book, Calypso is spelled with a C, but in ancient Greek it was spelled with a K. And so the artist of this map, used Calypso and her island as sort of a, well, anyway. So we're on Calypso's island. Hermes comes down and convinces Calypso to let Odysseus go. He gets on his boat that he makes and sails for 14 days before Poseidon sees him and strikes his boat down in the storm. And he ends up washing up over on this island of Scheria, where he meets Nausicaa, the daughter of King Alcinous of the Phaeacians. And he goes to a banquet where Odysseus himself meets King Alcinous, and King Alcinous asks him his name and who he is and to tell his story. And that's where we're going to pick up with the change of narration. And so this is also going to be a rewind. We rewind all the way back to when Odysseus is leaving Troy, and we're going to get the story of his life and how he ended up on Calypso's island and how he ended up from Calypso's island over to the Phaeacians and King Alcinous. So we're going to get a big old recap, but we have a change of narrative voice. We are now in the voice of Odysseus himself. So I'm going to put on my Odysseus voice, and we'll give this thing a shot. What shall I say first? What shall I keep it until the end? The gods have tried me in 1,000 ways, but first my name. Let that be known to you. And if I pull away from pitiless death, friendship will bind us, though my land lies far. I am Laertes' son, Odysseus, formidable for guile in peace and war. This fame has gone abroad to the sky's rim. My home is on the peaked sea mark of Ithaca, under Mount Neon's wind-blown robe of leaves, inside of other islands, Dulcinea, Same, and woody Xanthus. Ithaca being most lofty in that coastal sea and northwest, while the rest lie east and south, a rocky isle, but good for a boy's training. I shall not see on earth a place more dear, though I have been detained long by Calypso, loveliest among goddesses, who held me in her smooth caves to be her heart's delight, as Circe of Aea. The enchantress desired me and detained me in her hall, but in my heart I never gave consent. Where shall a man find sweetness to surpass his own home and his parents? In far lands he shall not, though he find a house of gold. There's like a theme of family, I think, coming through there that's pretty important. What of my sailing then from Troy? What of those years of rough adventure weathered under Zeus? Then we have a skip. The book says Odysseus explains that soon after leaving Troy, he and his crew land near Ismarus in the city of the Cicones. The Cicones are allies of the Trojans and therefore enemies of Odysseus. Odysseus and his crew raid the Cicones, robbing and killing them until the Ciconian army kills 72 of Odysseus' men and drives the rest out to sea. Delayed by a storm for 2 days, Odysseus and his remaining companions then continued their journey. We'll go to the map. So they sacked Troy. Odysseus left and attacked the Cicones here and defeated them, but actually the story is a little more complicated than Italics narration makes it seem. Odysseus wanted to leave immediately, but his men were busy loading sheep and cattle and getting drunk, and so they waited too long, and the Cicones army came and attacked them, and they had a big old fight, and 72 of them died. Imagine fighting for 10 years at Troy, only to die here after sacking the city. He spent 10 years sacking the city and 72 of his guys die. They get away, but there's a big storm that blows them way off course, and they have to fight off that storm for a long time, and they end up over here in North Africa in the land of the Lotus Eaters, and that's the next bit of the story that we'll read. So, the Lotus Eaters. Those of you who are familiar with Percy Jackson and the casino scene know something about the Lotus Eaters already. I might have made it safely home that time, but as I came round Malia, the current took me out to sea, and from the north a fresh gale drove me on past Cythera. 9 days I drifted on the teeming sea before dangerous high winds. Upon the 10th we came to the coastline of the Lotus Eaters, who live upon that flower. We landed there to take on water. All ships' companies mustered alongside for the midday meal. Then I sent out 2 picked men and a runner to learn what race of men that land sustained. They fell in soon enough with Lotus Eaters, who showed no will to do us harm, only offering the sweet lotus flower to our friends. But those who ate this honeyed plant, the lotus, never cared to report nor to return. They longed to stay forever, browsing on that native bloom, forgetful of their homeland. I drove them, all 3 wailing, to the ships, tied them down under the rowing benches, and called to the rest, "All hands aboard! Come, clear the beach! And no one taste the lotus, or you lose your hope of home." Filling into their places by the rowlocks, my oarsmen dipped their long oars in the surf and moved out again on our seafaring. This is kind of a fun little episode that Odysseus goes through. They land at this place called the Land of the Lotus Eaters, and he sends 2 of his men out to see who these Lotus Eaters are, and they never come back. When Odysseus goes to find out why they haven't come back, he finds that these people have eaten this flower called the lotus, and they've lost their desire to go home. They've lost their desire to do anything. All they want to do is sit there and eat the lotus, which is what the people of this place do. Obviously, this is a metaphor. The lotus flower, if you've ever seen a lotus flower, they are in the ponds, lilies and lotuses, sort of an Egyptian looking flower right there. So they don't really have any medicinal properties, so it's weird that it's a lotus flower. Most research would suggest that the thing that they're talking about is the poppy flower. The poppy flower produces something called opium. And most of you know what opium is. And so probably what we have here is a metaphor for drug use or drug addiction. The people go to the land of the lotus eaters and they eat the lotus, and then they don't even want to return home. They don't have any desires except to eat the lotus itself. And I think this is a metaphor, even back then, for the addictions of drugs or alcohol or what have you. One of the chief attributes of a drug addict, for example, is they cease to care about their family or their lives or their ambitions or whatever it was that they cared about before they became addicted to the drug. In fact, all that they care about is the drug itself and the escape that it provides them, and they will choose repeatedly over and over and over again their addiction over their loving family relationships and the things that matter. And Odysseus has to basically have an intervention and force these guys onto the ship to leave the land of the Lotus Eaters behind. It's a quick little snapshot of a lesson, but it's one of those social taboos teaching people, the way to behave in this metaphor of the lotus flower for anything that's sort of an addiction that draws you away from your goals. These people wanted to go home. They wanted to see their family, and the drugs, the plants became more important to them than their family did. And so whenever you see the lotus mentioned in literature, it usually refers to this story and this sort of an idea of forgetfulness. But we move on to the next chapter, the Cyclops. In the next land, we found the Cyclops, giants, louts, without law to bless them, in ignorance leaving the fruitage of the earth in mystery to the immortal gods. They neither plow, nor sow by hand, nor till the ground, though grain, wild wheat, and barley grows untended, and wine grapes in clusters ripened in heaven's rain. Cyclops have no muster and no meeting, no consultation or old tribal ways, but each one dwells in his own mountain cave, dealing out rough justice to wife and child, indifferent to what the others do. This narration, I think, is interesting because it tells us that the Cyclops are completely lawless. It makes them sort of nature. We talked about civilization versus nature as a theme here. These Cyclopses don't follow any rules. They don't follow any laws. They don't till. They don't plant. They don't grow. Everything is sort of natural here, and they each do what they want to do in their own selfish way without any law. So they're apart from law as well. We get a little italicized bit. Across the bay from the land of the Cyclops was a lush, deserted island. Odysseus and his crew landed on the island in dense fog and spent days feasting on wine and wild goats and observing the mainland where the Cyclops lived. On the third day, Odysseus and his company of men set out to learn if the Cyclops were friends or foes. They get in one boat and they sail across to go see uh, these Cyclops and find out information about them. Again, we were at the land of the Lotus Eaters, and now we're going to go to Sicily, which is where the Cyclops live. So they're sitting on an island here, and then they decide to go and check out the Cyclops itself. So that's what's going to happen. A lot of you may have heard this story, but it's best to hear the version that's in the Odyssey itself. It's the best version of the Cyclops story that exists. When the young dawn with fingertips of rose came in the east, I called my men together and made a speech to them. Old shipmates, friends, the rest of you stand by. I'll make the crossing in my own ship with my own company and find out what the mainland natives are, for they may be wild savages, and lawless or hospitable and God-fearing men. At this I went aboard and gave the word to cast off by the stern. My oarsmen followed, filling in to their benches by the rowlocks, and all in a line we dipped oars in the grey sea. As we rowed on and nearer to the mainland, at one end of the bay we saw a cavern yawning above the water, screened with laurel and many rams and goats about the place inside a sheepfold, made from slabs of stone, earth-fast between tall trunks of pine and rugged towering oak trees. A prodigious man slept in this cave alone, and took his flocks to graze afield, remote from all companions, knowing none but savage ways, a brute so huge he seemed no man at all, of those who eat good wheaten bread, but he seemed rather a shaggy mountain, reared in solitude. We beached there, and I told the crew to stand by and keep watch over the ship. As for myself, I took my 12 best fighters and went ahead. I had a goatskin full of sweet liquor that Euanthes' son, Marin, had given to me. He kept Apollo's holy grove at Ismarus. For kindness we showed him there, and showed his wife and child. He gave me 7 shining golden talents, perfectly formed, a solid silver wine bowl, and then this liquor, 12 two-handled jars of brandy, pure and fiery. Not a slave in Marin's household knew this drink. Only he, his wife, and the storeroom mistress knew. And they would put 1 cupful, ruby-colored, honey smooth, and 20 more of water. But still the sweet scent hovered over like a fume, and no man turned away when cups of this came around. A wineskin full I brought along, and victuals in a bag, it means food again. For in my bones I knew some towering brute would be upon us soon, all outward power, as a wild man, ignorant of civility. Pause. Now, the story is not going to tell you this entire bit about this wine, this brandy, if you will, that he brings with him, unless it's important. So he's got this super strong alcoholic beverage and tells you the whole history of where he got it. And I think it's interesting, the history of where he got it. He got it as a gift from somebody that he was staying at, somebody who showed him good hospitality. Remember, this is going to be a recurring theme throughout the entire story. But it goes into detail about the cost of it and how strong and alcoholic it is, and it does that for a reason. One thing though you do need to know is nowadays when we buy wine in the grocery store, you get the wine in the bottle, and the wine is already diluted. It's at whatever percent alcohol it is in a wine bottle, like 14% or whatever. But back then, shipping cost so much that wine was not shipped already diluted with water. It was shipped very concentrated. And that's what we're talking about here. They'd have these jars. In fact, maybe I pull up an image for you. They had these jars or urns. And these would be what they would ship their more expensive products like olive oil or wine in. They would have like sort of a clay tablet, sort of like a cork at the top that would plug it up, and they would fill it up. But because this is what you're shipping your wine in, you don't want a bunch of water in there with the wine. So they would essentially have like wine concentrate that was as strong as like whiskey or some other really strong, powerful beverage. And this is what Odysseus has with him. And the fact that the narrator takes all the time to tell us about it means that it's going to be important later on in the story. All right, where was I? Let's see. A wineskin full I brought along, and victuals in a bag. For in my bones I knew some towering brute would be upon us soon. All outward power, a wild man, ignorant of civility. Civility has the same root word as civilization. So this wild man, wild, akin to nature, ignorant of rules of civilization and nature and things like that. We climbed then briskly to the cave, but Cyclops had gone afield to pasture his fat sheep. So we looked around at everything inside, a drying rack that sagged with cheeses, pens crowded with lambs and kids, each in its class, firstlings apart from middlings, and the dewdrops or newborn lambkins penned apart from both. And vessels full of whey were brimming there, bowls of earthenware and pails for milking. My men came pressing round me, pleading, "Why not take these cheeses, get them stowed, come back, throw open all the old pens, and make a run for it? We'll drive the kids and lambs aboard. We stay we say put out again on good salt water." How sound that was! Yet I refused. I wished to see the caveman. What he had to offer. No pretty sight it turned out for my friends. We lit a fire, burnt an offering, and took some cheese to eat, then sat in silence around the embers, waiting. When he came, he had a load of dry boughs on his shoulder to stoke the fire at supper time. He dumped it with a great crash into that hollow cave, and we all scattered as fast to the far wall. Then over the broad cavern floor, he ushered the ewes he meant to milk. He left his rams and his he goats in the yard outside and swung high overhead a slab of solid rock to close the cave. 24 four-wheeled wagons with heaving wagon teams could not have stirred the tonnage of rock from where he wedged it over the doorsill. Next, he took his seat and milked his bleating ewes. A practiced job he made of it, giving each ewe or suckling that. Now we're talking about, each, he knows somehow which baby lamb belongs to which female sheep, and he's pairing them up, and basically it's showing us that the Cyclops, even though he's sort of animalistic and barbarous, he does take care of his sheep. He's sort of a shepherd figure. Let's see, and thickened milk, then into the curds and whey, sieved out the curds to drip in the withy baskets, and poured the whey to stand in the bowls, cooling until he drank it for his supper. When all these chores were done, he poked the fire, heaping on brushwood. In the glare, he saw us. "Strangers," he said, "who are you, and where from? What brings you here by seaways? A fair traffic, or are you wandering rogues, who cast your lives like dice and ravage other folk by sea?" We felt a pressure in our hearts and dread of that deep rumble in that mighty man. But all the same, I spoke up in reply. "We are from Troy, Greeks, blown off course by shifting gales on the great South Sea, homeward bound, but taking routes in ways uncommon, so the will of Zeus would have it. We served under Agamemnon, son of Atreus. The whole world knows what city he laid waste, what armies he destroyed. It was our luck to come here. Here we stand, beholden to you for help or any gifts you give, as a custom is to hold strangers. We would entreat you, great sir, have a care for the god's courtesy. Zeus will avenge the unoffending guest." So this is a reference to Zeus. One of the things Zeus liked to do in old Greek stories was he would transform into an old man and knock on people's doors and be like, "Hey, can I have a meal?" And if you gave Zeus a meal, he would give you a blessing. But if you opened the door and you saw an old beggar man, you're like, "Get out of here, old beggar man." Then he'd be like, "I'm Zeus," and then he'd curse you or kill you or whatever. And so this is what Odysseus is referring to, that Zeus holds it important that people receive hospitality when they arrive at somebody else's shore. And he reminds the Cyclops of this. Interestingly, this is how the Cyclops responds. That is a weird picture of a Cyclops. Actually, let's talk about Cyclops for a second. We're going to pause before we read this. So the Cyclops is a famous Greek creature, right? Like a monster with one eye. In fact, let me pull up an image or two. The Cyclops is this famous one-eyed monster that is like an ogre, if you will, except that its head has one eye in the middle of it. And so there's lots of these representations of Cyclops through art. This is an actual Greek image of one. Note the look of this particular Greek sculpture, that it looks just like a regular person except it has one eye in the middle. But there's historians who think that the Cyclops legend actually comes out of the fossil record. If you take a look at, historians say, the skull of an elephant, you will see that an elephant skull has one big hole in it, which is where the trunk would have come out and the nasal cavity would have gone through. But these skulls were in various locations around Greece, both skulls of elephants and skulls of mammoths, from like back in the Ice Age, and people would have found them, especially in caves and places where old civilizations used to exist. And they think that probably the idea of the Cyclops actually came from a storyteller who came in contact with an elephant skull. And you can see where that, I mean, let's just toggle back and forth. You can see where that image might come from. And where that idea might come from. In fact, it's been suggested that a lot of the monsters in stories come from mythological stories come from the fossil record. Dragons, for example, being connected specifically to dinosaurs, things like T-Rex that might have been found, and then the idea of the dragon coming out of that. Almost every culture has a dragon, and that's sort of inexplicable unless you look to the fossil record and make some connections. Some people have suggested that the idea of oops, hold on one second. Idea of the griffin, which was a big deal in Assyrian and Greek art, you can sort of see it there, actually had its genesis in the skeleton of the Protoceratops. You can sort of see the beaked image on the head. And there were a lot of these Protoceratops skeletons that have been found in the deserts just north of sort of Assyria, you know, like up into what's modern day Kazakhstan, areas like that. So it's pretty cool when you actually look at the historical record and some of the monsters and make those connections. Anyway, let's get back to our story. The Cyclops is going to answer Odysseus. He answered this from his brute chest, unmoved. Remember, Odysseus just asked him to have hospitality, to treat Odysseus and his crew members well and give them food and lodging and kindness. You are a ninny, or else you come from the other end of nowhere, telling me, mind the gods, we Cyclops care not a whistle for your thundering Zeus, or all the gods in bliss. We have more force by far. I would not let you go for fear of Zeus, you or your friends, unless I had a whim to. Tell me, where was it now you left your ship? Around the point, or down by the shore, I wonder? So, the Cyclops here essentially shows absolutely no care for the gods, and that's hubris, right? That's arrogance on his part. He should definitely care about the gods. We've learned that from I don't know how many Greek stories to this point. So that comes across loud and clear. And then he asks this question of Odysseus, where's your ship? Now, why is he asking that? Odysseus is a smart fellow, and he knows that he can't give away the location of his ship, or Cyclops is going to go down there and smash it. And so Odysseus says this. He thought he'd find out. But I saw through this and answered him with a ready lie. My ship? Poseidon Lord, who sets the earth a-tremble, broke it up on the rocks at your land's end. A wind from the seaward served him, drove us here. We're the survivors, these good men and I. Neither reply nor pity came from him, but in one stride he clutched at my companions and caught two in his hands like squirming puppies. That's a simile. The heroic Homeric or heroic simile or metaphor is a common thing. You see a lot of them in here. To beat their brains out, spattering on the floor. Then he dismembered them and made his meal, gaping and crunching like a mountain lion. There's another one. Everything, innards, flesh, and marrow bones, we cried aloud, lifting our hands to Zeus, powerless, looking on at this appalled. But Cyclops went on filling up his belly with man-flesh and great gulps of whey. Then they lay down like a mast among his sheep. My heart beat high now with the chance of action, and drawing the sharp sword from my hip, I went along his flank to stab him where the midriff holds the liver. I had touched the spot when a sudden fear stayed me. If I killed him, we perished there as well, for we could never move his ponderous doorway slab aside. So we were left to groan and wait for morning. All right, we got to pause this for a second and go back and look at that bit about the doorway slab. So if you go back, it said very clearly, he left his rams and his he-goats in the yard and swung a high overhead a slab of solid rock to close the cave. 24 four-wheeled wagons with heaving wagon teams could not have stirred the tonnage of rock from where it wedged it in the door still. So very clearly the story has told us that the Cyclops moved this giant rock in front of the doorway, and you need an enormous amount of power to move that, which Odysseus and his men lack. So immediately, Odysseus wants to get revenge for the two of his crew members that were murdered, and he gets ready to do that, right? So he's going to do that, but he holds his hand. So again, we're seeing, here we are. We're seeing Odysseus be smart. You know, he went along his flank to stab him where the midriff holds the liver, but he realizes if he kills the Cyclops here, he's never getting out, and he and all of his men are going to die. So what we give, or the author gives Odysseus here, is a logic puzzle. How does Odysseus get revenge on the Cyclops and kill him, and also escape with as many of his men as possible? If you kill the Cyclops while the door is closed, you're all going to die in there. So you have to get the Cyclops to open the door for you and somehow manage to kill him or punish him for what he's done. This is tricky, and Odysseus is going to have to try and solve this and figure it out. And that's sort of where we're going here. Let's see, where was I? When the young dawn, with fingertips of rose, lit up the world, Cyclops built a fire and milked his handsome ewes, all in due order, putting the sucklings to the mothers. Then his chores being all dispatched, he caught another brace of men to make his breakfast. He eats 2 more. So, what did Odysseus have? 12 at the beginning. He's down to 8 plus himself. So he's losing men relatively quickly. And whisked away his great door slab to let his sheep go through. But he, behind, reset the stone as one would cap a quiver. Another simile for you. There was a din of whistling as the Cyclops rounded his flock to higher ground, then stillness. Now I pondered how to hurt him worst. But if Athena granted what I prayed for. If but Athena granted what I prayed for. Here are the means I thought would serve my turn. So Odysseus thinks a long time. He and his men are trapped in the cave. The Cyclops has closed the door. They can't get out. He's going to be coming in, and then I'll put the door in behind him, and he obviously intends to eat them all. And Odysseus has to think of a solution to this problem. And he's going to tell you what he did, but he's not going to tell you what the solution is. So he's leaving you as a reader, the author is, to try and figure out what Odysseus' plan is here by seeing the things that he does to get ready for it. Here are the means I thought would serve my turn. A club or a staff lay there among the fold. An olive tree felled green, left to season for the Cyclops' hand. And it was like to the mast of a lugger of 20 oars, broad at the beam, a deep sea-going craft might carry. So long, so big around it seemed. Now I chopped out a 6-foot section of this pole, and set it down before my men, who scraped it, and when they had it smooth, I hewed again to make a stake with a pointed end. I held this in the fire's heart and turned it, toughening it, then hid it well back in the cavern under one of the dung piles in profusion there. Now came the time to toss for it. Who ventured along with me? Whose hand could bear to thrust and grind that spike in Cyclops' eye when the mild sleep had mastered him? As luck would have it, the men I would have chosen won the toss. 4 strong men, and I made 5 as captain. So he sharpened a stick, and he's planning on stabbing it into the Cyclops' eye, which is pretty gross. He only has 1 eye, so I guess that's he's going to blind him, seems to be the plan. At evening came that shepherd with his flock, his woolly flock. The rams as well this time entered the cave by some sheep-herding whim, or God's bidding. None were left outside. He hefted his great boulder into place, and sat him down to milk the bleeding ewes in proper order, put the lambs to suck, and swiftly ran through all his evening chores. Then he got up 2 more men and feasted on them. My moment was at hand, and I went forward, holding an ivy bowl of my dark drink, looking up, saying, Cyclops, try some wine. Here's liquor to wash down your scraps of men. Taste it, and see the kind of drink we carried under our planks. I meant it to be an offering, if you would but help us home, but you are mad and unbearable, bloody monster. After this, will any traveler come to see you? He seized and drained the bowl, and it went down so fiery and smooth that he called out for more. Give me another, thank you kindly. Tell me, how are you called? I'll make a gift that will please you. Even Cyclops know the wine grapes grow on the grassland and loam in heaven's rain, but here's a bit of nectar and ambrosia. 3 bowls I brought him, and he poured them down. I saw the fuddle and flush come over him, and then I sang out in cordial tones. Cyclops, you ask me my honorable name. Remember the gift you promised, and I shall tell you. My name is Nobody. Mother, father, and friends, everyone calls me Nobody. Now, obviously, his name is Odysseus, and here he is telling the Cyclops his name is Nobody. Why? It's interesting. And he said, Nobody's my meat then after I eat his friends. Others come first. There's a noble gift now. And so the Cyclops is like, I give you a gift, Nobody. I'll eat you last. You can watch all your friends die. Waha. Like, what kind of a gift is that? What a jerk. Of course, eating people is bad news all the time. We learned that in Tantalus. But whatever. Even as he spoke, he reeled and tumbled backward, his great head lolling to one side, and sleep took him like any creature. Drunk, hiccuping, he dribbled streams of liquor and bits of men. Yo, Homer, why did you have to give us that disgusting detail? Apparently he throws up and out come like hands and feet or whatever. Thanks for that. Now, by the gods, I drove my big handspike deep in the embers, charring it again, and cheered my men along with battle talk to keep their courage up. No quitting now. The pike of olive green, though it had been, reddened and glowed as if about to catch. I drew it from the coals, and my 4 fellows gave me a hand, lugging it near the Cyclops, as more than natural force nerved them. Straight forward they sprinted, lifted it, and rammed it deep in his crater eye. And I leaned on it, turning it as a shipwright turns a drill in planking, having men below to swing the 2-handled strap that spins it in the groove. So with our band, we bored that great eye socket while blood ran out and around the red-hot bar. Eyelid and lash were seared, the pierced ball hissed, boiling, and the roots popped. No! Yeah, this is pretty graphic. But he takes a red-hot poker and jabs it into his eye, and then he twists it, just for good measure. And obviously this is going to wake the Cyclops up. In a smithy, oh, God, yeah, we hadn't had enough detail on the sizzling of the eyeball. In fact, now we're going to get a very complicated Homeric simile that's going to describe exactly what it's like when you put a burning hot stick into an eyeball and twist it around. In a smithy, one sees a white-hot axe head or adze plunging and wrung in a cold tub, screeching steam, the way they make soft iron hale and hard. Just so, the eyeball hissed around the spike. The Cyclops bellowed, and the rock roared round him, and we fell back in fear. Clawing his face, he tugged the bloody spike out of his eye, threw it away, and in his wild hands went groping. Then he set up a howl for the Cyclops who lived in caves on windy peaks nearby. Some heard him, and they came by diverse ways to clump around the outside and call. "What ails you, Polyphemus? Why do you cry so sore in the starry night? You will not let us sleep. Sure, no one's driving off your flocks. No man has tricked you or ruined you." Out of the cave, the mammoth Polyphemus roared in answer, Nobody's tricked me. Nobody's ruined me." Aha! Right, like this is exactly why Odysseus chose the word nobody. Smart man. Because now the Cyclops is like, nobody hurt me! Right, and in his mind, he's like, this guy nobody hurt me. But all the other Cyclopses are like, oh, no big deal. Nobody hurt you. To this rough shout, they made a sage reply. "Ah, well, if nobody has played you foul, there in your lonely bed, we are of no use in pain given by great Zeus. Let it be your father, Poseidon, Lord, to whom you pray." Now, this is an important bit of information. We find out that the father of Polyphemus the Cyclops is actually Poseidon, Lord of the Sea. This is probably important given Odysseus has to get back on a boat. So saying, they trailed away, and I was filled with laughter to see how, like a charm, the name deceived them. Now Cyclops, wheezing as the pain came on him, fumbled to wrench away the great doorstone, and squatted in the breach, with arms thrown wide for any silly beast or man who bolted, hoping somehow I might be such a fool. But I kept thinking, how to win the game. Interesting that he's calling this a game. I mean, like, he's lost, 8 men or something like that to this point, and he's still treating it as if it's a game, and he's the winner. This is the hubris of Odysseus. He loves a challenge. He enjoys battles of wits against other people, in this case, the Cyclops. Now he's got to find a way to get his men out of there. The Cyclops is sitting in the doorway with his big hands out, ready to catch anybody who comes through. I drew on all my wits and ran through the tactics, reasoning as a man will for dear life, until a trick came, and it pleased me well. The Cyclops' rams were handsome, fat, with heavy fleeces, dark violet. I tied them silently together, twinning cords of willow from the ogre's bed, then slung a man under each middle one to ride there safely, shielded left and right. So 3 sheep could convey each man. I took the woolliest ram, the choicest of the flock, and hung myself under its kinky belly, pulled up tight with fingers twisted deep in its sheepskin ringlets for an iron grip. So, breathing hard, we waited until morning. When dawn spread out her fingertips of rose, the rams began to stir, moving for pasture, and peals of bleating echoed round the pens, where dams with udders full called for a milking. Blinded and sick with pain from his head wound, The master stroked each ram, then let it pass. But my men, riding on the pectoral fleece, the giant's blind hands, blundering, never found. Last of all, my ram, the leader, came, weighed by wool and me with my meditations. The Cyclops patted him, and then he said, Sweet cousin Ram, why lag behind the rest in the night cave? You never lingered so, but graze before them all, and go afar to crop sweet grass and take your stately way, heading along the streams, until at evening you run to be the first one in the fold. Why now so far behind? Can you be grieving over your master's eye? That carrion rogue and his accursed companions burnt it out when he had conquered all my wits with wine. Nobody will get out alive, I swear. Sorry, nobody will not get out alive, I swear. It's a double negative. It's actually kind of funny. Had you brain and voice to tell me where he may be now, dodging all my fury. Bashed by this hand and bashed on this rock wall, his brains would strew the floor. I should have rest from the outrage nobody worked upon me. So this little speech by the Cyclops towards his best ram is sort of ironic as well. He's like, oh, if only you could talk. Certainly you'd tell me where nobody is. And obviously Odysseus is right underneath the ram as this is going on. That's kind of funny. But he also says, nobody will not get out of here alive, which is like saying everybody will get out of here alive, which is exactly what happened. They all just got away. And nobody did get out alive. Odysseus did manage to escape. So, again, there's lots of wit in this story. I enjoy that. Anyway. He sent us into the open then. Close by, I dropped and rolled clear of the ram's belly, going this way and that to untie the men. With many glances back, we rounded up his fat, stiff-legged sheep to take aboard and drove them down to where the good ship lay. We saw as we came near our fellows' faces shining, and then we saw them turn to grief, tallying those who had not fled from death. I hushed them, jerking head and eyebrows up, and in a low voice told them, load this herd. Move fast and put the ship's head toward the breakers. They all pitched in at loading and then embarked and struck their oars into the sea. Far out, as far offshore as shouted words would carry, I sent back a few to the adversary. Oh, Cyclops! Would you feast on my companions? Puny I am in the caveman's hands. How do you like the beating that we gave you, you damned cannibal, eater of guests under your roof? Zeus and the gods have paid you. The blind thing, in his doubled fury, broke a hilltop in his hands and hurled it after us. Ahead of our black prow it struck and sank, whelmed a huge spuming geyser, a giant wave that washed the ship stern foremost back to shore. So the thing lands in front of the ship and washes the ship back to the island. Not great for Odysseus. I got the longest boat hook and stood fending us off with furious nods to all to put their backs into a racing stroke. Row, row, or perish. So the log oars bent, kicking the foam sternward, making head until we drew away twice as far. Now, when I cut my hands, I heard the crew in low voices protesting. Yeah, so Odysseus taunted the Cyclops once, and now he's like, I'm going to taunt the Cyclops again, which is just stupid. Like, leave him alone and you get away fine and there's no worries. And his crew knows this. His crew is complaining. God's sake, Captain, why bait the beast again? Let him alone. That tidal wave he made the first throw all but beached us. All but stove us in. Give him our bearing with your trumpeting, and he'll get the range and lob a boulder. Aye, he'll smash our timbers and our heads together. I would not heed them in my glorying spirit, but let my anger flare and yelled, Cyclops! If ever a mortal man inquire how you are put to shame and blinded, tell him Odysseus, raider of cities, took your eye, Laertes' son, whose home is on Ithaca. At this he gave a mighty sob and rumbled. Now, what Odysseus did here is arrogant, right? Like we gotta acknowledge the hubris of Odysseus. Odysseus does not want the Cyclops to think that his name is nobody. Then the Cyclops will forever be beaten by nobody, and nobody will know that his name is Odysseus. And he wants everybody to know that Odysseus is the one who outsmarted the Cyclops. And so he calls to the Cyclops, hey, my name's Odysseus, and just in case you don't know which Odysseus, my dad's name is Laertes, and I live in Ithaca, right? So he told the Cyclops literally everything that he needs to know about him. And this is the Cyclops' reply. At this, he gave a mighty sob and rumbled, now comes the weird. That weird is an old English word for fate, and why Fitzgerald used the word weird instead of fate makes no sense to me. So I'm just going to start and replace it with fate. Now comes the fate upon me spoken of old. A wizard, grand and wondrous, lived here. Telemus, a son of Eurymus, a great length of days. He had in wizardry among the Cyclops, and these things he foretold for time to come. My great eye lost, and at Odysseus' hands. Always I had in mind some giant, armed in giant force, would come against me here. But you, small, pitiful, and twiggy, you put me down with wine. You blinded me. Come back, Odysseus, and I'll treat you well, praying the god of earthquake to befriend you. His son I am, for he by his avowal fathered me, and if he will, he may heal me of this black wound. He and no other of all the happy gods are mortal men. Few words, I shouted in reply to him. If I could take your life, I would take your time away and hurl you down to hell. The god of the earthquake could not heal you there. At this, he stretched his hands out in the darkness toward the sky and stars and prayed to Poseidon. Oh, hear me, Lord Blue Girdler of the islands. If I am yours indeed and you are my father, grant that Odysseus, raider of cities, never see his home. Laertes' son, I mean, who kept his hall on Ithaca. Should destiny intend that he shall see his roof again among his family, in his father's land, far be the day and dark the years between. Let him lose all of his companions and return under strange sail to bitter days at home. Obviously, that prayer is prophetic. I mean, it's really all the same things that actually happened to Odysseus. It takes him 10 years to get home. This is only his, third adventure from leaving Troy. It's only been a few weeks. It's going to take him years to get home. He's going to lose all of his crew members. When he gets home, there's going to be trouble under his roof. All of these things come true. So, if you pluck the eye out of the head of the son of Poseidon, don't tell the guy your name. Especially not if you're going to get on a ship and have a sea voyage to get home. This is, in fact, where all of Odysseus' trouble comes from. He was on his way home. He was having a sort of a long journey, but it wasn't going to be 10 years. And now that he's pissed off Poseidon and he's been like, hey, my name's Odysseus, son of Laertes of Ithaca, tell your dad. This is where it's arrogance, it's hubris that causes all of his problems. And this is a very Greek story to have that sort of a lesson built in. Anyway, in these words he prayed, and the god heard him. Now he laid hands upon a bigger stone and wheeled around Titanic for the cast to let it fly in the black proud vessel's track. But it fell short, just aft the steering oar, and whelming seas rose giant above the stone to bear us onward toward the island. As we ran in, we saw the squadron waiting, the trim ships drawn side by side, and all our troubled friends who waited looked seaward. We beached her, grinding keel in the soft sand, and waded on, ourselves on the sandy beach. Then we unloaded all the Cyclops' flock to make division, share, and share alike. Only my fighters voted that my ram, the prize of all, should go to me. I slew him by the seaside and burnt his long thigh bones to Zeus, beyond the storm cloud, Cronus' son, who rules the world. But Zeus disdained my offering. Destruction for my ships he had in store, and death for those who sailed them, my companions. Now all day long, until the sun went down, we made our feast on mutton and sweet wine, till after sunset, in the gathering dark, we went to sleep above the wash of ripples. When the young dawn with fingertips of rose touched the world, I roused the men, gave orders to man the ships, cast off the mooring lines, and filing in to sit beside the rowlocks, oarsmen in line dipped oars in the gray sea. So we moved out, sad in the vast offing, having our precious lives, but not our friends. All right, and that is the end of book 9. So we will move on to book 10 in the next video. If you guys have any questions, do not hesitate to drop them in the comments in the bottom. I'm happy to listen to them. You've now heard the story of the Cyclops.